spiritual endeavor of the creative act. Any person who has gone through the process of feeling an idea come into their body and actually making it into a physical reality, getting from point A to point B on the quest of creativity, whether that was a business, writing, essays, YouTube videos, a company you started, a project that you wanted to do on the freaking weekend. You have had the experience where something dropped into your mind almost miraculously and then you made it. Or you have also experienced something called resistance. And I have just the book for you. The War of Art. This book by Steven Pressfield, if you've read it before, you will know the magic that I am about to speak. What we're talking about is something called resistance, and I will credit Steven Pressfield for really so beautifully and profoundly and eloquently putting to words what it is that resistance is. Capital R, resistance. That is how he references it in the book, and it is something that has turned into a very great way to name the feeling, the journey that you're on when you do something creative. If you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it. I'll link it down in the description. The War of Art. Break through the blocks and win your inner creative battles. Any artist knows, any human being who has attempted to create something that came from within them has felt resistance, has gone through the battle that the ego presents in trying to convince you that you shouldn't do it. And what I want to do today is read you a couple excerpts from this book to help put language to what we're experiencing. If you're new to the channel, this video is part of a larger series called Getting Out of Your Own Way. This is really where we talk about the spiritual endeavor of the creative act. What is happening within us, around us, when we endeavor to create, when we endeavor to do something, to make something, to let our muse speak through us. And I want to give us some words. I want to give us some terms to talk about to help us understand what it is that we're going through. When we have terms, when we have a way to put language to our experience, we are often able to transmute, transcend, and alchemize whatever we're going through. Okay, number one, resistance is invisible. Resistance cannot be seen, touched, heard, or smelled, but it can be felt. We experience it as an energy field radiating from a work in potential. It's a repelling force, it's negative. Its aim is to shove us away, distract us, prevent us from doing our work. Resistance, otherwise known as the ego, otherwise known as self-doubt, fear. Any story, anything in your mind, in your body, in your area that is trying to convince you not to do it. Something that sounds like, you're probably not good enough to make this work. Why would you ever write? You're probably pretty shitty at this. What are your friends gonna think from high school? What is your mom gonna think? Would your dad think that this is okay? What if you fail at this? What if you quit your job and it doesn't work out? Resistance comes in many forms. It has really no bounds, and I think most people have experienced it in so many different ways. I'd love to hear in the comments the ways that you've experienced resistance to help other people as well figure out if this is that thing. One thing is for sure, and this tends to be universal. It feels like an invisible force and we don't really know where it comes from. I think we could get into if it's the ego, if it's a subconscious mind, if it's our conditioning. I think it's really a combination of all sorts of energies, of stories, of beliefs that we accumulate over time that try to convince us that we can't do the thing. There's another perfect quote that I'll pull from The Alchemist, which talks a little bit about this as well. This is from The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. It's an incredible book. If you haven't read it, you really should. He says, and it's a fiction story. It says, it's a force that appears to be negative, but actually shows you how to realize your personal legend. It prepares your spirit and your will because there is one great truth on this planet. Whoever you are and whatever it is that you do, when you really want something, it's because that desire originated in the soul of the universe. It's your mission on Earth. Now, that it that it's talking about is this mysterious force that tends to come up for every single human being when they endeavor to do something great, when they endeavor to create. Something inside of us stops us. It stops us in our tracks. It wants us to think that we can't do it. That's what we're gonna call resistance, and I think we'll swap that as well with ego. Now, the first thing I want you to take away from this is that this is good news. we have a name. We can put a name and a face, so to speak, to something that we are experiencing. Not only that you're experiencing, that I've experienced, and that likely most human beings on this planet have experienced at some point or another. Resistance, the feeling that you're doubting yourself, you don't want to do it, you're afraid to do it, and it manifests in so many ways. Addiction, sickness, illness, relationship problems, all kinds of issues will happen because of this sneaky little thing called resistance. Now that we can name it, we can identify it. And when it happens next time, we don't have to necessarily listen to it. I'm gonna get more into the actual act of getting out of your own way, but for now, we want to identify what is happening inside of us in this endeavor, the spiritual endeavor to create. What is happening on that route so we can identify where we're at in the process. Part of that is this thing called resistance. Identify what it is, identify how it shows up for you. You'll be much more able to work through it. For me personally, resistance shows up in the fact of me oversleeping, being excessively tired and wanting to stay in bed longer, missing my alarm, other forms of self-sabotage where I put things off, I procrastinate, I convince myself that it's not worth it right now because I can't make money from it, all sorts of sneaky ways that this comes up. And you see right here, resistance and procrastination. Even Steven Pressfield knows this one. Now, the other term that I want to bring up, and I've already mentioned, but to kind of give it a bit of a different explanation, is the ego. Ego is talked about in this book as well, but for my own definition, for my purposes, I see the ego as being the thing that wants to keep us safe and is supposed to keep us safe, but sometimes gets confused and doesn't really understand what's really going on. If you think back to centuries ago, we have a very intelligent body. We have a body that is able to go into fight or flight when it's necessary, and because of that, it turns off and on certain bodily functions. So for example, if I'm being chased by a lion, my body doesn't really care about digestion anymore, so my stomach will probably hurt, but that's because all my energy is going into getting away from the lion, right? That's a good thing. The thing is, today, we kind of had this issue where our minds perceive an issue. They perceive that we're not safe, and they perceive that we're not safe because we're uncomfortable. You will have a creative idea. And that your mind interprets as, this is scary, this is new. And in turn, your body gets involved and starts to feel unsafe. This is where you want to think about the role of the nervous system. For our purposes today, the ego is that thing that wants to keep you safe. And so instead of becoming angry or hateful towards your ego, one important thing to do in this process is to identify, again, when it is that your ego is talking versus your soul. Your soul, your muse, whatever you want to call it, God, universe, source, that's the thing that's giving you the idea, right? If you are on this channel, it's probably because you're a bit of a spiritual being. We all are, but some of us identify with it more. Then you'll know what I mean. When you feel like you're channeling something, something is coming through your physical vessel. And so that's soul, right? That's spirit. And on the other side of that, we have ego. It wants to keep us safe. It wants to keep us warm in our cave. It doesn't want us to be socially rejected because we're trying some crazy idea. So it's important to recognize the ego because this gives us another little aspect to pinpoint about what's really happening. When we have terms like resistance and the ego, we can start to put together a better understanding of what we're going through. So to bring back in Steven Pressfield and the War of Art, this is what he says about the ego. And there's this wonderful little diagram, which I'll put on the screen, where he shows a picture of the ego and the self. The ego, Jung, he's talking about Carl Jung, tells us is that part of the psyche that we think of as I, our conscious intelligence, our everyday brain that thinks, plans, and runs the show of our day-to-day life. The self, as Jung defined it, is a greater entity, which includes the ego but also incorporates the personal and collective unconscious. Dreams and intuitions come from the self. The archetypes of the unconscious dwell here. It is, Jung believed, the sphere of the soul. So the point is, if the ego exists within the self, then this is just a part of us that likes to speak up and likes to have a seat at the table as we make decisions. And there's really nothing wrong with that. So it's recognizing where we're at in our journey and what's actually happening here. The key to breaking free from the illusion is to recognize the illusion in and of itself. This is why you probably see all sorts of cartoons and political cartoons that show that people are trapped in their own minds because they don't even realize it. They don't even know that they've been sold an illusion. And if you can recognize what that illusion is and realize that the cage you're stuck in is one you built on your own, then you have the power to break free. And now, for the third point of this, to give an example of how that resistance might manifest, and one that I think is pretty common for us, is resistance and criticism. Now, if you've ever been triggered by seeing someone else live out their dreams, by seeing someone else be authentic, seeing someone else do the thing that they love, and you watching that actually turns into you criticizing the person or just feeling really, really bad about yourself or just going down the path of negative comparison, this is a form of resistance because we are triggered in seeing somebody else do the thing that we know deep down that we also can do. But right now we're being driven by fear, by resistance, by ego. Steven Pressfield says, if you find yourself criticizing other people, you're probably doing it out of resistance. When we see others beginning to live their authentic lives, it drives us crazy if we have not lived out our own. Individuals who are realized in their own lives almost never criticize others. If they speak at all, it is to offer encouragement. Watch yourself. Of all the manifestations of resistance, most only harm ourselves. Criticism and cruelty harm others as well. The reason that you might be triggered by somebody else living out their best life, by somebody else showing up, doing the work, putting their creative acts out there, is probably because resistance is running your show. Because you are letting your ego, your fears, your self-doubt run the show. And of course it's gonna be triggering because your soul, yourself, knows deep down that you can have and do what that person is doing. And because of that, it feels upsetting. It feels like a threat because someone else is doing it and I'm not doing it. There must be something wrong with them. We put out the blame, we make ourselves a victim. So now you might be wondering, how the hell do we get out of that? How do we stop letting resistance and ego and fear run the show? Well, as I've said, that first step is to recognize where they actually are. If you have gone your whole life feeling like you've never had the encouragement, the motivation to start that thing, start here. Recognize, where am I letting resistance run the show? What habits have I picked up that are because I'm too afraid to do the thing, to execute the idea, to take the first step? How have I started to self-sabotage? Am I sleeping in because I'm avoiding the day? Do I snooze my alarm because I'm afraid that if I wake up and have another day go by where I don't do my creative act, that I'll be a failure? Ask yourself, where resistance and ego are manifesting themselves in your life. When you know where those places are, you can start to eliminate those things. If I keep snoozing my alarm and know deep down that's because I'm afraid to take on the day because it's a whole oyster for me to possibly fuck up, I need to stop snoozing the alarm. You have to face head on the manifestation of your resistance. If it's turning out to be you lashing out at your partner because you have a frustrating workday and you're sitting in a job that you don't like, recognize that there's nothing wrong with your partner, there's nothing wrong with your relationship. Resistance is making its way into your life. Find out where those things are, and I guarantee you'll be able to do something about those things. We can't fix the problem if we don't know what the problem is. We can't break free from the illusion if we don't know what the illusion is. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you share it with someone, give it a like, and of course subscribe for more. There's gonna be tons more videos in this series. I really hope you enjoy it. And if you've experienced resistance before, make sure you leave a comment. I'd love to hear about your experience. You sharing your story might inspire someone else to do the same. It might make them feel seen. That's what this is all about in the end. It's the spiritual endeavor of the creative act. We're all in it together. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.